I'm thinking perhaps if we divide this session into two, in the first part for maybe 10 minutes or so, we can specifically ask the panels the way in which they've specifically done things, and then perhaps for the second part open it up to others in terms of how they've addressed the same kind of issues in some of their areas, if that makes sense. So certainly as a starter, it's been very interesting to hear how you've progressed in various ways in your various areas and dealt with the particular challenges that you've seen. I was just wondering, how would you advise other water utilities to go along the same route based on the things that you've learned? So those who haven't perhaps progressed this far yet, how would you advise them to go forward?
As a starting point, I think that what really helped us on initial was to a trial with the Tyneside study and to get some local authorities together and start talking to them. That certainly came mushroom because other local authorities and lead local flood authorities who were not in that group were feeling a bit jealous. And then there was the demand. So I think it's trying to build a demand to be involved. And I think by starting small, it was much easier rather than trying to get the 13 together as one. Start small and then build it up from there.
I'll just add to that as well. Just from an internal perspective, I think what was useful, particularly when developing the ODI, was that you get that sort of senior level buy-in. So the idea of having some sort of ODI that would drive sustainable drainage came from the bottom and went up, but then getting that buy-in at the top level to then agree to what that ODI was, and then that was then set in stone. That I think that made a big difference, because now the company has bought into that and we have to deliver against that ODI. So I think that, obviously you only get one chance every 5 years to do something like that, but PR19 is not far around the corner, unfortunately. So there are going to be opportunities soon to start thinking about how we're going to keep driving this forward. So for some of that will be doing more of what we've done and maybe doing it differently, and for others it might be starting and looking at what we've done. So.
Okay. Yeah, and in terms of starting schemes, I suppose, and doing things differently, certainly the community engagement piece up front is absolutely key. We've worked with, we've seen the likes of sort of Sustrans, Groundworks, some other sort of not-for-profits, really, really innovative in what they do. So Sustrans, as an example, will put, if they're thinking of doing something on a street, we'll just put a load of hay bales out in the street, get people thinking, like, what's going on here, and sort of getting people to think about, what might be happening, how the street could be used differently, rather than perhaps as we as engineers and water companies might do, is just probably go into a huddle for a bit and come up with a load of drawings sort of 6 months later. So I think that upfront customer engagement, once you've got the buy-in, exactly as Jonathan says, that upfront community piece is absolutely vital.
So hopefully there's going to be a report from UCWR, which is a partnership working report, which is going to be hopefully published quite soon, I believe. It is published, and that sets out some really good best practice on different water companies and what they're doing. So that's a good starter for 10 if anybody is interested in what water companies are doing and local authorities are doing and how we're able to put sustainable drainage in by working together.
Okay, to the floor. Sue?
Well, I was going to ask, Carl, but make it perhaps more general. 20 for 20, presumably that's within the AMP period, but thinking about what you're going to achieve, 20 hectares sounds a lot, but when you look at your map of London, it's probably a dot. So in terms of thinking about your responsibility, not just for London but elsewhere, how do you see that progressing with the water company in terms of what it can start to do to make some sort of realistically, genuinely significant improvements within the area of your water company, and perhaps ask all of you?
Sure. So it's a really good question, and that's why I think we've had to sort of strike a balance between starting something and demonstrating that that it works, that the benefits are there, which is what I think we've tried to do. I mean, a lot of people have always asked me, why 20 hectares? Why aren't you doing more or less, etc. To be honest, it was a sensible first step. Assuming we can show through the pilot that it works and that we get the not just the upfront reduction in surface water runoff, but also then in the sort of medium to long term that it continues to work. I think there's a strong case then to increase the amount that we do. We've got a view from that heat map, I suppose, as to how much would need to be done over time to offset the impact of climate change. So a lot of our thinking at the moment is really around, well, how much might we have to do, not just in London, but across the whole of the Thames region. So they're really, really good questions. I don't quite have the answers today yet, but I think we've got a number of things in place to hopefully begin to give us the evidence and the data that we need behind our future programs. But 20 for 20 and the ODI is something that I think we very much want to continue.
Yeah, I think when it comes to surface water reduction and surface water management, I'd completely agree. And you're right. It would be a very small dot in a very large area, and we all cover huge geographic areas, and probably the main issues we all deal with are very dispersed around that area, but very small points within that large area. So I think it's about being, I suppose, ultimately realistic about what you can achieve in the kind of AMP period. Understanding where we've come from and where we're trying to get to, I think. So I think, which is why, going back to the question you asked me earlier, Sue, it's, we're not necessarily putting it must be, X hectares or X cost on what we're doing. It's about driving change and trying to do things a bit differently. So, and then we'll take that forward into the future.
We don't have an ODI, we don't have any targets, we just have a change of culture, which is do it, and if it's not being done, why not? In all honesty, we have a technical panel that meets for every project when options are developed for every project, and that technical panel breeds SUDS and surface water separation, and we didn't feel a need to put targets for it. It was just a desire.
Yeah, this question I would like to pose is we'll be looking at what each other are doing in the UK, the local authorities, the water companies, and so forth. But I wonder, are we looking at sufficiently, elsewhere what is happening to see, what they are doing, and what lessons we should be bringing in, to UK to sort of make it to work. Perhaps are we looking at the right thing? For example, New York, they're looking at this from a different point of view. They're looking at from water quality perspective to introduce green infrastructure retrofitting, not just from flood risk. We're trying to do something which is difficult to quantify unless we have mass scale sort of retrofitting program to derive the flood risk reduction we're looking for to reduce flood risk. But if you flip the coin and say, can we derive different benefits to just sort of top up flood risk benefit, that might have a better case to put. And also perhaps I've seen some examples where when talking to sort of overseas colleagues, they often look at sort of green infrastructure retrofitting from economic regeneration. So just changing the sort of the street environment completely to bring in the job creation, not just sort of water management.
I think your main point in your question, you're exactly right. We need to really start to think about bringing the water quality and the flood alleviation sort of benefits of sustainable drainage together. We've been doing quite a lot of work with Thames 21, who work on sort of various parts of London on the river basin sort of management. I was amazed with some of the work that they've done with some of our funding in taking areas where we've got a misconnection problem, and they've been using wetlands to basically treat, I would say, the remaining sort of polluted flows in some of our surface water outfalls. That was a real eye-opener. And some of these were quite big schemes. We're talking like, many hectares. So I can see the need to bring that together with the flood risk management aspects as well, particularly as we move into the next 5-year planning cycle, and the Water Framework Directive and compliance is going to become increasingly more important.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've noticed quite recently as well, is that the driver in the UK seems to be very flood risk related, whereas you look overseas, it's far more water quality focused. So, but interestingly, I didn't talk about it earlier, but some of the projects we're doing at the moment are water quality focused. So it's emergency overflows at pumping stations that are polluting watercourses, and we're looking to retrofit SUDs upstream of that to reduce that. So, so we are looking kind of wider than just flood risk, but I take your point, it has very much been focused that way in the past, but there are lots and lots of opportunities, I think, to look elsewhere, definitely.
Would you say that there's a need to bring that back into the planning process from a master planning perspective? Because very often, obviously, you're coming at it from a water company perspective, but very often those water quality elements can be delivered largely through the way in which a development is master planned right at the beginning, so they can actually say, well, let's get those water quality elements here. Do you think that's something that we need to push out more to the planning authorities rather than coming from water companies in the driving of that?
I think simple answer to that, yes. And really, it's not just a water company, definitely not just a water company issue. And pollutants and everything else that gets into our water courses. There's a lot which agriculture can do, and I know that Newcastle University have worked at Belford in Northumberland with agriculture to see what can be done for flood risk and also for reduced agricultural runoff from those locations. And if you have a look at the Blue Green Cities website as well, Blue Green Cities is not just looking at the blue infrastructure and what that brings for a flood risk benefit, but also all the economic growth. We've had presentations by Portland, Oregon. There's case studies throughout the world which has been included in that study. It's well worth a look if you haven't seen it.
You have a question?
Graham Fairhurst, Chair of the Sustrain PSG. I'm afraid I missed a fair bit of the Northumbria first presentation, so I apologise if part of the answer might be already been presented. I'm very interested in the engineering. I'm an engineer, and I think there are many engineers in the room who are interested in the engineering, but I was really going to ask, how far have you, through these projects, tried to push at the other obstacles to SUDS, the legal boundaries, plus the fairly well-known aversion that the water companies have to accepting land drainage flows into sewerage systems? And I'd be interested as to how you've approached those issues as scheme promoters, whether you've tried to stay within the world that you know, or how much you've pushed at boundaries to try and extend out into dealing with those legalistic challenges.
Well, I think until the change of the Water Industry Act and allowed us to serve notice on a more sustainable approach rather than just for hard engineering elements, it happened in June 2014, I think it was, June 2014. So at Brunton Park, for instance, we started before then, and that was one of the elements where we could work with the local authority, because the local authority had the powers to serve that notice, and the EA had the powers to serve notice on the landowner and also the tenant to enable that work to take place. That didn't stop them from being a big objector, and I think going back to finding what was beneficial to them and finding something which would enable the project to take place from a benefit not just to the sewerage company and the Environment Agency, but also to the local population and an amenity factor. What was the second part of that question, sorry? On
The key issue that water companies do have an aversion to accepting, because SUDS ideally should infiltrate water out, there is a risk that they can infiltrate water in, and therefore therefore a risk that land drainage waters may enter a sewer?
I think we have an aversion to land drainage entering the system because one is not designed to do it, and two, we have to treat it. And our systems are designed for a capacity. If that capacity is being taken over by land drainage, and there's lots and lots of land drainage connected into our systems, that just increases the flows and decreases headroom, and that just leads to big investment opportunities. We would much rather that land drainage be removed and be used in a different way.
As a related question, if we're putting suds in and we are infiltrating water into the ground, has it been your experience, or have you seen this happen, where that results in increased infiltration, below ground infiltration into your systems, including into foul sewers that were never designed to take surface water at all, because of poor connections on those systems?
I think that our Northumbrian Waters experience is that, you know, as Chris said, we didn't design our systems for infiltration. It's basically a clay basin which we're putting in, and we're not getting much infiltration out of that basin. Certainly when we designed the diversion of the Usburn to take it and the flows, there was no special design, there was no lining, or there was some rock protection underneath there, but there was no infiltration or exfiltration from that above the norm.
If we could perhaps ask the floor, what would help you to deliver suds more from the water companies? What could water companies do to help you deliver sud schemes in your areas? Is there any thoughts as to what that might be? Bob?
Well, I'll just come back to that point.
Sorry, can you use the...
We've been designing suds for 20 years, and we very often come with, there is no alternative in suburban and urban areas but discharge to storm or combined sewer. And not all water companies, but some water companies take the view that you take, that you can't allow any water from a sud scheme because there is a risk of groundwater, or there's a risk of surface water from something other than roof or yard getting into the system. If you take that view, you stop suds happening, because there is no other way that water can be dealt with, and it either flows over land or flows otherwise into a sewer system. It seems to me that unless water companies take this issue on head on, they will be preventing suds being implemented where either a swale or a pond or a permeable pavement may have groundwater entering. In all of these cases, the sud system gives you a controlled flow, that is downstream of runoff rate. I've yet to understand a logical reasoning why the water company wouldn't take that water.
I think there's a difference between accepting uncontrolled and unmanaged land drainage than there is suds. The two, one is designed and the other one's not. So we have an awful lot of land drainage. We have named rivers that enter our sewerage system. If we can control and manage those through sustainable solutions, great. All for that.
So if a sud scheme can demonstrate to you that the water will be entering the combined or the storm sewer at, say, Greenfield runoff rate, an agreed runoff rate, you wouldn't have an objection to that water being entering your system?
That's not my area of new development. I don't know what our answer to that is.
It would be very useful to know, because it really gets in the way of such design.
Any others? As to, sorry, at the front first of all.
There's something very simple, and that's sharing good practice. And I'll give you a very crude example, and that's dealing with developers who are building out-of-town shopping centres, who build large sheds and collect the water from the roof, but can't see any liability for car parks which have a surface area many times that of the roof. Try talking about rain gardens. Where is the one I can go and look at down the corner? Now, if that sort of experience was shared, we'd have a better chance, I think, with developers.
Anybody else in the room? Richard?
Well, the main area that troubles me really is the fact that the water company is actually responsible for a relatively small area of impermeable surface compared to the urban environment. Most of it is in the public realm, the highways and so on. So there's a natural difficulty where, you know, the word partnership has to be repeatedly given, and ownership is discussed. Until the whole urban surface can be addressed. I mean, the municipalities on the continent and so on don't have any problem with dealing with things because they talk amongst themselves and they're one organisation and deal with it. But it seems to me there's a fundamental difficulty that if water companies will only adopt things in public areas, which means, you know, a park or something like that, with a big hole in the ground, you know, we're never going to get the sort of distributed vegetation stuff across the public realm, the community across the whole city. So, you know, 65% of the paved surface is in highways. So although there's been a lot of talk about partnership and so on, it's a fundamental obstruction, it seems to me, to actually an effective distribution or growth of suds across cities.
So, sorry to come back on that, but if the local authority have an area, they have a SUDS suggestion, they are responsible for the highway drainage, I don't see what's stopping the local authority from putting sustainable drainage in for that highway drainage and managing it themselves. They're more than capable of doing it.
And so what I'm getting at is that you have the skills, and you know, we're looking to water companies to take a lead, some of us and so on, but because of the legislative silo effects of things, it's automatically creating barriers. So whatever goodwill you might have in terms of achieving things, bearing in mind, as you pointed out already, the Industry Act and so on, constrains your role. There is automatically these barriers which have to be overcome to deal with things. So because you deal with a relatively small proportion of the impermeable surface, you are on the back foot in being able to take a lead in this. That's my perception.
I think that's too black and white. In all honesty, I don't know what anyone else feels, but we have good working relationships with individuals and departments and councils as a whole. And if you look at the areas where we're working with Newcastle City Council on their highways improvement programme, and that's just one example. And it's those barriers may have been there in our region in the past and may still be with certain councils, but with a lot of them, those are broken down. I wouldn't even say they are being broken down; they have disappeared.
Yeah, I think I touched on it earlier. I completely agree, but I wouldn't say it's 100% of highways authorities from us. You know, there are some that are good, and we're doing some great work with. Norwich example I mentioned earlier. You know, Norfolk Highways and ourselves are integrated as a team, looking at how we deliver retrofit SUDS in certain catchments across the city. So, but that's not the case across the whole of our region. So it's touch and go. But the only way to do it is break down those barriers and build those good relationships. I agree with what you're saying, Richard. We do it differently here than we do elsewhere in the world, and you could say it's better there or it's better here. I don't know which, but you know, the only way that we can do it under the legislation that we work under is to build those relationships and break down those barriers so that we can work together. It's the only thing we can do.
Okay, I think that probably, sorry.
Can I push it around the other way? What makes it a no-brainer for water companies to work with local authorities and third sector organisations like Sustrans and well, what are you looking for from local authorities and from the third sector organisations for you to invest and work together delivering schemes?
Shall I start? The first thing to say is there needs to be a benefit for our customers at the end of the day of working together. Now, all the stuff we've talked about today, clearly there's a benefit there. So, but that's not always the case. You know, we've got some really good examples on the table today. So, but I also think that, you know, those sectors have certain skills that potentially the water industry are not so good at, and particularly the sort of customer engagement stuff and the, you know, trusted, you know, organisations on the ground, particularly the kind of NGOs and charities and stuff like that, who've done some great work. Groundwork's been mentioned a number of times today. You know, they do some excellent work and, you know, trusted to deliver that kind of stuff. So, so there's real benefit from working together with those people, I think. So, and I think the key thing to identify is where the skills lie. You know, we might be good at designing stuff, but they might be good at engagement or the delivery or whatever it might be. So it's about divvying it up and making sure the best people are doing the right things, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, goes back to what I was saying about the upfront community engagement work. I mean, that it's very difficult as a water company employee to wear a high-vis jacket and start walking the streets with a notice board at 7 o'clock at night and annoying customers. It's much easier to find somebody within that area to champion your cause and then work your way into a community that way and get buy-in. And, you know, that the third sector organisations just seem to be perfectly set up to do that, and they have some very innovative ways of working. You know, so I think the key thing is we set our incentives up to work in this way. I think that, you know, by and large, you know, they are working. We are thinking differently, and we need to reach out to some of these third sector organisations and use them in this new way of working to the best effect.
Okay, I think we probably need to leave it there because that's we've just run over for a few minutes. But I certainly think, just to sum up, the thing that comes out to me from this is very much the issue of partnership working. Partnership working, it seems to me, is not a one-way street. It's something which water companies clearly step out to do and talk to their customers about, but it also needs to come back from ourselves as the industry that is trying to deliver SUDs. But the other thing to say is that the water company's customers are also the customers of the local authority and also the customers of developers when they're buying houses, and they are the same people who are wanting the same things, but they also tend to see things in that siloed kind of way. So really it's for all of us to push out in that approach of partnership, and not to do it in a aggressive way, but to look and look for opportunities. And that comes back to local authorities. I mean, I've seen situations when I've come into London, I've seen a brand new piece of pavement outside of King's Cross Station where they've just removed this old building. Now, maybe somebody's put some sustainable drainage systems under that system, but it doesn't look for all the world to me like they have, and they've just done it. And there was a great opportunity to put something in a little bit more green and so on. The same thing, Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester, it was all concreted over, and it was a nice green area, and now they're going back and retrofitting green areas back into Piccadilly Gardens because it just became this concrete thing that was there. So it's all of us to really look at those opportunities and work together to deliver. And that's what I would say, as much as anything. It's for all of us to go out there and say, let's look for those opportunities and work together to do those opportunities, and not just work on an us and them kind of approach, which is very, very easy to do. So if we can thank our presenters, it's always a challenge presenting to an audience such as this that is very diverse and also has a lot of opinions, shall we say. So if we can thank them in the usual way.